if our child has asthma, we're not sort of whispering about it and hiding in inhalers. We're bringing them out in the open. So I think an essential skill is knowing that they have ADHD, and what that means, so that they can start to identify, not as an excuse, but as an explanation as to what's going on.
Welcome to the Soaring Child podcast, where parents of children with ADHD learn tips and tricks to help their child soar at home, at school, and in life. We feature interviews with experts, medical professionals, and parents just like you who are learning how to reduce ADHD symptoms using food and other natural strategies. Because children with ADHD deserve to soar just like every other child. I'm Dana Kay, your host. Now it's time to welcome Laurie Dupar to the Soaring Child. Hi, Laurie. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Donna. I'm excited to be here. I really am. I'm passionate about family, so This is a real treat to be able to talk about this with you. Thank you.
I really appreciate you coming and joining me today with all of your knowledge and all of your experience. So all of our listeners are really lucky to be able to hear from you today. I'm interested to know, though, what made you so passionate about ADHD?
My own kids, yes. Honestly. I've always been interested, I think, in mental health in general. I've been probably for the last almost 40 years. And then through that, I went, my training and my expertise as a nurse led me to train as a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. And it was after that training and I was out practicing that my son was diagnosed with ADHD. And here I was, someone who had gone through the training. I was basically the person you went to be diagnosed. And I had no idea how to help him. And he was this amazing little boy who I knew was brighter. I have 4 kids, by the way, brightest of the bunch. And they know I feel that way about him. And he was struggling. He was struggling academically. He was struggling socially, emotionally. And I didn't know how to help him. And so it was really through that I started learning as much as I can. I realized how much I didn't know about ADHD. I understood the medications, at least, the hour that they spent on that in our training, and most medical trainings, by the way, that's the truth. But I started learning about that, and it led me to actually taking a course, finding out about coaching. And I thought, I'll do anything, right? Whatever I need to do. He had been diagnosed. We had medication. We didn't want to try that. We wanted to try something else before we went that route. So I took a course on coaching and really started to see there was another way to work with people in general. And it made a lot of sense to work with him. So it was really through that experience that I realized how much of an impact and change this could make in people's lives and how much people didn't understand. So I've now been an ADHD life coach for 20 years and have opened my own training program for coaches, usually parents who have children with ADHD, honestly. And it still amazes me 20 years later how much is misunderstood and the lack of awareness. And by the way, my son is doing wonderfully now. He is ready to graduate from University of Washington, I mentioned, with a degree in computer science. So it wasn't always a smooth road, but that was my first passion. Yeah.
Well, I think that's wonderful because, I'm here for the exact same reason. And, when parents go through this and the struggles and then they come out at the back end with all this information and, being able to help their child, they've just got this passion to be able to share it with others. So I really appreciate your story. I actually wasn't aware of that. So I appreciate you sharing that with the listeners. Now, so you went back to school to do sort of life coaching for ADHD. Can you just tell me a little bit about what that involves?
I'm trying to think. I'm sort of convinced, Donna, that I am someone that basically it's like I just kind of keep going to the next breadcrumb, right? So the training that I ended up doing, when I realized you have to realize up to that point, right? My training had always been something that was licensed. So I was always wanting to provide actually the best service I could for the people that I worked with. So hence my becoming a nurse practitioner. And then as a coach, I started to look around. At the time we were living in California, and I actually went to one of the ICF credentialed coach training programs. The International Coaching Federation is the regulating and body of coaches. And so I went through that training first, and there wasn't really an ADHD coach training at that point, how to work with people with ADHD. In fact, a lot of the coaching was very, very new, and they didn't really encourage people to work with people who had diagnosed conditions, which is sort of silly now, but because that's not the case. However, it was very clear to realize that working with people with ADHD, this was such a great model for that. And having that additional knowledge of ADHD is important in order to understand behaviors, children's behaviors, what they're doing. And when you don't have that lens to look through, you can still apply the process of coaching, but the meaning of what's happening with them changes drastically when you understand that this is part of their ADHD behavior. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I completely agree. When you know the why, it actually makes
Yes.
total sense, and it makes
Yes.
you more compassionate, and
Yeah.
gives you the ability to be able to coach them better as well. That's wonderful. I know that you talk a lot about a child's brain style. So what is helpful for parents to know about their child's brain style, and so they are working with them, not against them?
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing, Donna. For years, I sort of put behind me. It's like I'm kind of a purist, right? I was doing coaching. I wasn't bringing all that other knowledge and experience that I had from my medical training. And when I finally did, it made a huge difference to be able to work with parents, to be able to help them understand that. And I also bring a lot of sort of science knowledge. I'm a natural learner. I always look for, as you said, the why underneath the behavior. And so I was able to bring to parents, a lot of whom were thinking they were being manipulated by their children. They were being told they were being manipulated by everybody else. They were told that their children might be morally corrupt. I mean, all sorts of things that were going on, to be able to help them understand, not only but from a very scientific view, and also real understanding of the brain, that when your executive function isn't fully activated, our behavior is going to be in certain particular ways. One of the things that I think is super important is to understand from a developmental standpoint that really up until about the age of 12, kids are pre-programmed to please adults and parents and teachers. So, and they're doing that basically for survival. It's how we've survived as a human species, honestly. After that age, our motivation is very different towards our peers, right? We're more motivated by what they say they want than what our parents say. But when I'm working with families with children under age 12, I just we have a conversation about that. And it makes a huge difference for them to understand that if their child is not doing what they want them to, it's not because they don't want to, it's because they can't do it. Because they are pre-programmed to try, kids are pre-programmed to try and please us as adults. It's to their benefit to be able to do that. So that just in itself, when I talk about the brain style, it's not only from an evolutionary standpoint, but also from a neurobiological standpoint of understanding what sorts of behaviors that we see when our executive function, which is what is happening mostly with ADHD, is not fully activated. Paying attention, we know the sort of what I call the trifecta, the paying attention, the focusing, the hyperactivity that happens, but it can happen in very, very subtle ways that may not necessarily be listed in the books, to be honest with you. There can be some really, but it's absolutely fits the criteria as far as those symptoms go. And as you said, once they understand that, a parent who is thinking that if I isolate my child in their room with just a pencil and paper, maybe they'll finally get their homework done. Maybe hasn't asked what we learned to do in coaching is, what are you doing in there, right? With that pencil and paper. And kids will tell me, you'd be surprised at how interesting paper and pencil can be when that's all I have to work with. These are creative kids, right?
Yes, yeah. So the brain style is really just understanding what is behind the symptoms or behind the behaviors.
Absolutely.
And when you understand
Absolutely.
them, you know
Yes.
how to work with them rather than against them. No, I love that. And
Yes.
so, my son has ADHD. He is now 13. He was originally on 3 or 4 medications, and we were able to, reduce stuff going on in his body. And he was one of the lucky ones to be able to get off them. And he's thriving and he's going well. But obviously, we always want to do what's best for him. And I remember back in the day, we did behavioral therapy, we did some coaching, and back then it didn't really help. And so I'm interested to hear from you, being the expert, what age is best to try coaching with a child?
So it's a great question. And I thank you for sort of wrapping up what I last said. My mind, I get so passionate about this, I could talk about it forever, right? So thank you.
Yes.
You did a great job of wrapping up that part about the five. Thanks. So what age? I have coached children as young as 7. Um, and I like to say as old as 88 years old, right? For the kids, it's really when there's a couple of things about coaching, right? It's when they're struggling. They don't necessarily even have to be, for me anyway, they don't necessarily have to be diagnosed with ADHD, but the challenges that they're having need to be consistent with that. And the behaviors need to be pretty close to that. It's just what my specialty is. There's a requirement in coaching. It's part of our practice guidelines, is that we only coach people who want to be coached. And in coaching, the child becomes our client, not the parents.
Yes.
The parents, I absolutely encourage parents to be there because they learn so much because of the way we ask their child questions. But when they can start, I usually find, again, can be as young as 7 if they want to do that. Some may coach parents and children younger than that. What I find is that with really young children, it may be meeting with them alternatively as meeting with their parents as well, because parents, I know the kids, I'm a huge child lover, right? Parents, though, set the tone of what happens in this child. They're the most significant people in a child's life. So when they understand in a different way this brain style that we talked about, what is going on with their child when certain things are happening, it makes a huge difference. So yes, we can coach. The child has to be willing to do that at whatever age, up 7 to 18. And also involving the parents is a huge bonus if they're willing to be there. But the client is identified as the student.
No, that's interesting. Yes, because I think that as the child gets older, these types of techniques definitely help. So talk me through a session. Just say you've got a 10-year-old, and he comes in, he or she comes in and sits down. Talk me through a session. What happens?
So yeah, I'm laughing mostly because I think 10-year-olds are some of my favorite ages, right? About here in the United States, and I know it might be different in different parts of the world, but they might be in 2nd or 3rd grade. It's a time when I actually do see a lot of students, partly because cognitively, again, their brain style. We've got ADHD, and then we have what our brains normally do at certain ages, right? It's an age when a lot of concrete thinking sort of goes away, and children start to become very, very creative. So oftentimes a 10-year-old might come into my office, or the parent might come into my office because their child is constantly either emotionally breaking down, also which usually leads to social breakdown when you get to that age group. And then also what's happening is because they're changing the rules, the other kids are changing the rules on the playground, which can be very difficult for someone with ADHD when you're a black and white thinker, right? They have a hard enough time figuring out what the four square ball rules are, and then everybody starts changing them about that age. But what usually will happen, let's put it this way, kids aren't scrolling the internet looking for an ADHD coach. 20 years, I've probably gotten a call from someone under 18. Usually it's a parent that reaches out first, right?
Yes.
And I have what I call a consultation with them. It's absolutely, there's no charge for that. What I'm really trying to find out is whether or not the child is perhaps ready for coaching, and also find out from the parents what their perspective is on what's going on with their child. Which is really important, like I said, because I want to make sure that I'm able to support the parents' approach to the parenting, and they are such a vital part when it comes to kids. Usually if a child, and then what I will do is the parents I ask them, if you have any questions about it, ask me now before you go to your student, especially if they're under about 12, because they're going to take their cues from you, whether or not this is something that they want to do or something that they don't. After about the age of 12, what I will do is I still have that consultation. Like I said, kids are not trolling the internet looking for ADHD coaches. The parent will usually call me, and it can be a combination, Donna, of things like social. It's usually social, academic, or they're worried about a behavior that's happening, like something's wrong with my child, or they're noticing odd behavior. An odd behavior might be that they notice that their child's eating a lot of, stealing the cookies at night or something, that kind of thing. So because they've had ADHD, they might call me, or they might have emotionality issues where they might be what I call imploding, sort of the kids that sort of, when they get upset, end up crying and sort of withdrawing, and then the kids that sort of explode.
Yes.
That might be one of the scenarios. I'm always asking the parents also, what do they ultimately want for their child? And what's fascinating about that is that ultimately, I've never heard any different. It's a variation on the theme of, I want them to be happy and be able to take care of themselves and to have good relationships. I mean, it's always along that line, so to speak, even though the issues that a parent might call with are definitely very different than that. Things like grades and how many friends they have and whether they socialize.
You determined that they're coachable, that they want to be coached, and they come in after their introductory session, they come in. How do you start with them?
Okay.
Let's just say the parents aren't there.
Right. Yeah. One piece before that, I always then talk again to the student if they're about 12 and over, and I ask them the same questions. So basically, I invite them in. Right now, I would do that over Zoom, but I always ask the student and thank them for coming and spending time. Kids have a lot of things, hopefully, that they're doing besides sitting and talking to somebody. Although depending on the age of the student, they have usually had a lot of interface with medical professionals, but they realize right away, by looking at my background, looking at how I'm dressed, that something's different here. Usually I will ask them at first if they want their parent there or not as we talk. And if they don't, then I ask the parent to leave and give us some privacy. Confidentiality, again, is a very important part of the coaching process. So I might start, one of the things with kids that I find is really important to start, as you mentioned, when I'm working with kids, is to establish trust with them, to really not start with what they're doing wrong. I do absolutely admit to them that I've talked with their parents a little bit about what some of their concerns are, and I'm happy to share those with them. But I'm really what they realize is that I don't just start by saying, so what's happening with school, or why are you getting good grades, or why are you hitting your brother, or things like that. What I'm asking is, tell me who you are. Establishing that trust is huge with kids. They have had so many people telling them what to do and how to do it, and not really listening to what is happening, that this behavior is going on, that and again, this is one of the things that makes coaching different, is that that's really my first focus. I might ask them what their dog's name is, what their best friend's name is, what's their favorite thing to do at recess, or what's their favorite class at school. And I think all of those things initially, in a very short amount of time, has them realizing that I'm not just interested in what they haven't done right, but also who they are and what their strengths are. Eventually, I'll certainly get around to asking them, do you know why I'm here? You're here. Sometimes they've been told, sometimes they haven't. And I'll always introduce myself and tell them how to address me. Again, kids are told all sorts of different things, and it's an awkward sort of situation. So I let them know that. I ask them what they'd be doing if they weren't talking to me, acknowledging that this is something, on a value. I ask them to keep track of the time for me and let them know, and to tell me when we're just about at the time, because I don't want to take any more of their time than I said that I would. But what I'm asking them is, and an example would be, I worked with a 10-year-old boy who he had seen a therapist, he'd seen a psychiatrist, I don't know who all he'd seen, but his mom brought him in because he had never had a day where he hadn't hit his brother. He had been diagnosed with ADHD. I think he also had some anxiety there as well. But she said he has ADHD, so I'm giving this a try. And one thing to know about kids with ADHD, one of the things when they're either angry or they can anger somebody else or frustrate somebody else, it actually is like getting a natural dopamine hit for them. So it happens actually quite frequently. But I remember talking to this young 10-year-old boy and asking him, so what it was that was happening, that he always, every day he hit his brother. Right. I wasn't telling him what not to. I just saying, what's going on that's happening? And of course, he told me the story about the little brother, of course, is bugging him. Right. And here you have an older brother with impulsivity, is going to want him to stop. That's usually what hitting is about for kids, or even getting angry, is that they just are feeling overwhelmed. He also, I said, so what happens when you hit your brother? And he says, it's really, I really don't like it, because then I don't get dessert. I said, what's your favorite dessert? And he told me it was ice cream. And so here's this kid who has just told me, and as a coach, I'm listening for what motivates him is ice cream. And I said, I'll tell you what, and again, there was more interaction with this, but I'll tell you what, I said, would you like to come back and have another talk with me? And usually with kids, I'll do that. I won't necessarily say we're going to meet for 4 or 5, 2 or 3 months or something. He said, yeah, I'd like to do that. Because again, he felt heard, he felt listened to, wasn't blamed for it. And I said, how about this? When you come back, I will, and we lived in the same area. So I said, I'll have a $2 Baskin and Robbins, 31 flavors of ice cream ready for you. And every week you're not hitting your brother, I'll just have this for you. What do you think about that? He said, oh, that would be really awesome. Well, the first week he came back, his mom said it was amazing. He hit him only one time. And so we talked about that, like what worked on the days he didn't hit him, what worked on the days that he did hit him, what happened on the day that he did hit him, so that we could sort of fine tweak what he could do instead of hitting his brother. I don't quite remember exactly what he did, but it was something like, rather when he got upset with his brother, rather than hitting him, he kind of started to walk away, which was a totally new thing for him. And he came up with it. The week after that, never hit his brother again. And every week he came in, I was running down to the Baskin and Robbins to get another, certificate, because I said, you get one, and then the rest of your family does. So now his younger brother is going, well, I'm not going to really bug him, because if I do and he hits me, I don't get ice cream, right? Kind of thing. So that's just one example of.
So really trying to find motivations to change the behavior, but then also when the behavior does start changing, working out what is helping that change and really promoting.
Absolutely.
Promoting.
Working it out. I had a little guy I worked with that, again, about 10 or 11 years old. I worked with him off and on for several years, and his academics had improved because we'd figured out sort of what was getting in the way of that. And his mom brought him in again, and he wanted to come in and talk to me. And because he was falling asleep in class, which was unusual, and not doing as well in math as he wanted to. And so I asked him, and no one else had really asked him this. I said, "So tell me, what's going on?" And he said, what we found out was that he actually was so motivated to do well in math. He had read somewhere, learned somewhere that if you study before you go to sleep, you actually retain more of it. So this little guy, literally 10 years old, Donna, was setting the alarm, studying before he went to sleep, like at 8 o'clock at night, setting an alarm at 3 o'clock, waking up, studying. And so when he got up in the morning, went to school, he was literally sleep deprived, but he
Oh
was
my
so
gosh.
motivated to study, but
Mm.
nobody really asked him what was going
So,
on, right?
listeners, I think that this is the takeaway point here. Start having conversations with your children. Try
Oh,
to get to the understanding of what's behind the symptoms, what's
mhm.
behind that hitting, what's behind that falling asleep. And so that's, I feel, the biggest takeaway. Now,
Yeah.
Laurie, you talk a lot about, or you advocate a lot about essential non-prescriptive strategies, to better manage children's ADHD symptoms. Can you give us a little bit of background into that and what that means or entails?
Yeah, I think that I despite my background, there are many different ways, tools, what I call to manage ADHD, and they are very essential. And part of it may be teaching children, especially children, skills to, or helping, let me put it this way, working with them to develop skills for the areas that are challenging for them, that they've identified are challenging, not the adults in their life
Mm,
that they think are challenging. It has a lot to do with their ability to feel successful and then to apply that outwards. But an essential skill may be how to deal with when they feel so angry, like this little boy who hit his brother.
mm,
How to manage that, or what to do when they started to get overwhelmed and feel, and imploded. 13-year-old boys do not want to be crying in class, and they are, because they're overwhelmed with what's going on. So having them also understand what not partly what ADHD is, of knowing that their brains are, all of our brains are different, by the way, but their brains in particular can struggle with certain areas, and even people with ADHD, that's very unique. So helping them understand that this is not necessarily something that is, they can't learn to manage better, but it's something that their brain does differently, just like someone does better in math or reading or uh,
mm-hmm.
PE or something like that. So having them understand that they have ADHD, it's a conversation that tends to still be filled with a lot of shame. And I think we need to be able to present as parents a very matter of fact approach, right? If our child has asthma, we're not sort of whispering about it and hiding in inhalers. We're bringing them out in the open.
Mm.
So I think an essential skill is knowing that they have ADHD, and what that means, so that they can start to identify, not as an excuse, but as an explanation as to what's going on, and also stop the shame. My goodness, these kids barely get through 8 years old without feeling ashamed of themselves, because whatever they're doing that feels natural is not working for them. So knowing how to manage those emotions more effectively, and it can honestly take years, knowing how to remember things. Again, as kids get older, we sort of naturally, or a lot of times schools will just give them a planner. And I can't tell you over the years how many times most students don't use them, and there's various reasons for it. So taking a field trip to the Office Depot store or whatever to find a planner or a way to remember something. I don't really care what it is, but our brains are already overfilled,
Mm-hmm.
and having a way to, what I call an external reminder system, is something that can really benefit students, especially as they get older.
Mm-hmm.
Also, advocating for themselves. Children as young as 7 or 8 years old can go and talk to their teacher or somebody else about what's going on, to find out how they can help change the situation. Advocating is something that somebody with ADHD benefits from, a skill of doing advocacy for the rest of their life. And it starts really, when you're a student to do that. I'm amazed and so humbled by these young people who are having to advocate for themselves, or to ask for and beginning to feel comfortable asking for what they need in a way that isn't shameful, and find out that it actually is helpful for them. Knowing what their passions and interests are. Children with ADHD need an area of what I call competency. Or it's not a new concept, but I think especially for ADHD, they need that. We tend to focus or have them spending their time on academics. It's what kids do, but then they don't have time to sort of expand that and discover what other interests they have. And they absolutely need that. And their interests, honestly, may not typically fall along the typical lines that you're going to be exposed to in academics. For instance, my son we lived in California, we lived near a town called Rockland. And my son got interested in gathering rocks and, the geodes and things like that. So he was the youngest member, literally. My husband went along with him, of the Rockland Rockers,
Wow.
club, because he went out doing rock hunting. To this day, he still likes rocks, right? Another student turned out to be an expert marksman with a bow and arrow, had a little bit of exposure to it in his physical education classes, but pursued that. So know that our students, again, are very bright and creative and interesting people, and to not limit what that creativity or that area of interest might be for them. They need that. And oftentimes that's going to eventually, it's not while they're young, it becomes where they feel good.
Yeah.
Later on, it may become where they actually end up supporting themselves or working in that particular industry.
Yeah, it becomes their superpower. And I love that you brought that up. I recently interviewed a gentleman who had ADHD, was very, very, very successful. And his superpower was copywriting. And he is one of the most sought after copywriters. He gets paid $500,000 just to write one letter. And so he found that superpower, and it is what has excelled him in life. And so I completely appreciate that. I just want to ask, I think before we finish up, I know a lot of parents out there are probably thinking to themselves, well, my kid, all they're interested in is video games. Do you have anything to say about that, or anything that parents can do to steer that in a different direction?
Mm-hmm. So I have, like I've said, Donna, I've raised 4 kids. They're all adults, and early 30s into their mid 20s. 3 of them now we know have ADHD, including myself, my husband. So we're just sort of an interesting family. I think my other daughter has ADHD as well. Only one of my kids was a video game guy, and this is at the very, very beginning of video games. I think my other son never touched a video game. He was the one that was always out there playing soccer, playing golf, he was physically very, very active. I do think that in childhood, especially, our children benefit from having multiple experiences. And so if I was rather than telling the parents what they could do, I guess I could do this. I would have the parents ask the student, like, what is it they get from doing this? Really explore this, not from a judgmental standpoint, but recognizing that some people's brains are just pre-programmed to get to really do well in video gaming. It's an area of competence for a lot of students or a lot of young people with ADHD. However, it may be interfering with the balance of their life. So it's really listening to them, understanding and acknowledging what they get from it. Because I'll tell you what, if you lock that video game up, those kids are going to find a way to unlock it and open it up themselves. That's what happens. But some people are actually they are pre-programmed. But it was no different than when I was growing up. We thought the television was the the worst thing ever. I remember having a half hour of television I could watch a day, and I did watch 15 minutes of each show. Before that, it was rock and roll. Video games are the thing now, and a lot of times they actually do help students with concentration, but we certainly want balance with that. As a personal story of this, I really think, again, if there's balance in somebody's life, great. If there's not, it's time to sort of find out what else are they passionate about? What are they getting from the video gaming that maybe might be other ways to do that rather than just sort of locking it down or shutting it down? There's a reason that they're doing that kind of activity, and to find other ways that they can express that. But my own son, basically in high school, sat in a dark room with a video in front of him, and then he went into the military, sat in an even smaller room on a submarine looking at a screen. So he's well trained to get there.
Interesting.
Now he's working at Microsoft, looking at a screen, getting his computer science degree, and wanting to take that and actually work with whales and the communication of whales. So, like I said, we can demonize videos, and I understand we don't want our children to do, and we want a balance for our children. I had one student that said to me, my mom says I get in a book home. I mean, all he would do was read. It was his passion, but it was preventing him from doing other activities. We just have had so much, I think, media about videos. In video and gaming, we don't stop to think, what is it that they're getting from this? What is it that their brain is needing? What is an interest or passion here that they might have that we can help support maybe in other areas, that so that they have more of a broad sort of experience as they're growing up. That's
fantastic.
Really
I love that story that you shared. I think that's a perfect example of someone embracing that passion and that superpower and bringing it into their life. And so I think that is a great story.
It was just an interest of his, and it ended up becoming actually his career.
Amazing. Well, Laurie, that's all we have time for today, but I'm sure that we could keep chatting about all of this stuff. But I really want to thank you for joining me, sharing your knowledge and experience with listeners. Please tell listeners where they can find and follow you online.
Oh, yeah, thank you. You can pretty much contact me and find me at my training center at www.iactcenter.com, IACT center.com. It's the International ADHD Coach Training Center. So, I'd love to hear from you. Fantastic. Go there and you'll find a way to contact me.
Fantastic. Well, thank you once again for joining me. Listeners, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of The Soaring Child. I'm Dana Kay, your ADHD health practitioner. Keep on thriving. Thank you for listening to the Soaring Child podcast today. To learn more about how to help your child with ADHD soar using natural strategies, visit our website at adhdthriveinstitute.com and follow us on social media at ADHD Thrive Institute.